Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Back with you, Patrick. Apparently, to do nothing at all.
Yeah, as always, completely unprepared.
Always, always. Hey, what have we got this time, this Friday?
A little bit less on the docket
Mm-hmm.
than in past weeks, but that's because we have two quite meaty subjects that we wanted to prioritize. So one
Yeah.
is talking. I'm in the privileged position talking to you, the OG of
Oh, come
Contech,
on, come
construction tech
on.
investing in India. So we're going to talk about India and construction tech. First half, and then second half talking about next generation construction tech models versus
Mm-hmm.
first generation construction tech models. So as promised, both are pretty meaty.
Yeah, very
So
interesting. What do we start with?
yeah, let's go with India. I
Okay.
can't actually, I was looking forward to this, and so um, I think a lot of folks in the Western world find India a fascinating market, but don't necessarily have the experience dealing with it. And so, also judging by just day-to-day conversations we're having with other VCs, with friends and strategics, with founders, it seems like there's this growing interest in discovering construction tech in India. And on the one hand side, I really love that because for us, India is such a core market and has delivered amazing returns already. But on the other hand, I find it quite hilarious. I find it hilarious because you invested in construction tech in India already as early as I want to say 2017 or 2018. You're going to
Yeah.
tell me all about that.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you come from the continent. You've been a partner in K Capital before we partnered up here in Fundamental 6 years ago. And so you know the Indian market really, really well. So I feel like our audience would appreciate from you how, what it actually looks like. And so I want to lead in with the first question, just tossing it over to you is just before we even talk about how does construction tech work in India and what do
Mm-hmm.
the models look like, just give me an impression of what are even the companies in
Mm-hmm.
construction tech in India and give me a sense of the scale.
Yeah. Um, but by the way, it's quite fascinating. If you fast forward or if you rewind 5 years ago, when we started Fundamental, and at that time, when I'd met many of our peer VCs over in India, all reputed names, a lot of them, their first reaction when they thought of, hey, construction tech, they're like, huh, construction tech, right? Will it ever work in India, right? So that was actually the reaction, mind you, 5 years ago. And I must
Wow.
preface what I'm going to say now that actually now it's one of the hottest themes, and most top tier VCs today focused on India or even globally investing in India do have a construction tech strategy. So, and that transition has fully happened in 5 years, or
Wow.
probably less in most cases, maybe three or four. So to I guess lead in with high level numbers, right? So we already have five unicorns in construction tech in India, right? All minted in the last 2 or 3 years, of which, get this, depending on which financials you look at, either two or three out of these five are profitable, net profitable after tax,
Net profitable,
right?
not gross margin, okay?
Not
Net
gross
profitable.
margin, not, hey, we are profitable at a unit level, or we are profitable on delivering every order, etc., right?
We had a net profitable day.
Exactly. So I guess when I put all those air quotes, both VCs and founders know exactly what I'm saying. So that's, I think, referencing you guys. So no, so I'm talking about net profitability where you had to pay tax on your income as a company. So either two or three, depending on which financials you treat as a cutoff out of five, and three out of those five operate at a scale of greater than $1 billion in annualized gross revenue or GMV, right? So
Wow.
now again, look, what is the true valuation? It's debatable, I guess, but it's real scale. It's not a pie in the sky, randomly, suddenly a unicorn made out of nowhere. So these are
That's right.
firms where And today, if you were to meet anyone in the traditional construction supply chains, so think general contractors, large industrial conglomerates, they would know all five names,
Yeah.
right? And I guess just shout out to all of these firms. Feel like in some ways, I have ties to a couple of them directly, in a few others also very good ties. First, of course, to our portfolio firm Inframarket, then to Zetwork, where before Fundamental through K Capital, I had the privilege of being the very first investor. Then also Off Business, which is another fabulous company solving for the financing needs in the construction procurement supply chain. Then Live Space, where we have our good friend Ramakant is one of the founders, solving for the home interior design and build market in
An
India
old
and
friend of yours.
Southeast Asia. Correct, that's right. And finally, a company called Moglix, which is solving for the maintenance, repair, and operations needs for various industrial conglomerates and construction firms.
So you're
In
an
India.
early investor in two of them.
Correct. So, the interesting
And
thing is,
I want to add this perspective before you continue, Shub. But I want to add this perspective. So in construction tech, depending on who you ask and how you run the numbers, there's anywhere between 10 to 20 unicorns currently in the world.
I'm glad you asked.
Five
So
in India.
I was going to say, so I think quite often, and I must say, as you laid out, I've also had this experience sometimes speaking with investors who come in from other geographies who sometimes think, hey, they haven't heard of any news from India, so maybe they're going to now export, construction tech investing to India, and I think they often get taken by surprise. It's hard to get data, of course, from China, but I think it may not be wild to guess that it's easily the second largest number of unicorns in construction tech, which is itself a fairly new space. And the rate at which real change is happening, it's really phenomenal. And I'm so happy and so proud that we kind of have this very privileged view into this ecosystem as it's been developing.
So what are the models? Let's maybe continue with that before we talk about a few other things. But like, what are the models that are so appreciated from India? And quite honestly, where I think they are first of its kind, and then only after India has minted these models, other geographies start copying that.
Yeah. So I think the basic model, and there's various iterations of it, right? Depending on which vector the firm chooses to optimize more on. But the template, if you will, the most basic template is of a managed marketplace, as it's called, which would usually adopt three layers to it. The first layer being a very operationally involved procurement marketplace, solving for a combination of goods, services, logistics, right, with the idea to be the final deliverer of a solution, not an intermediate connector to someone else who could do the
Not an
solution,
Alibaba.
not an Alibaba, not uh, an eBay applied to a B2B context, for
Right.
example. The buck eventually rests with you as a platform. I think we've talked about service-rich platforms. We've talked about project management as a service. India is more or less where I guess this term applies to the truest, and it's now more and more companies around the world are embracing this philosophy to kind of, and obviously it captures many concepts which venture capitalists would deem as not very venture capital like or not very startup-y, like being very operationally involved, being prepared to deploy working capital. That's another crucial thing. So coming back to what I said earlier, there's three crucial pieces. The first is solving for procurement through an operations aspect, delivering the end product or end solution, which could be delivering a commodity or could be delivering a service like a manufactured product, which means access to manufacturing services. Or it could be a combination to a service, as in a person who's about to deliver a service on site. Like for instance, in the case of repair, maintenance, installation kind of services. And the final piece, and that's the first piece. The second piece is a technology. Now, the interesting thing, which Patrick, obviously, you and I have had many animated conversations of this, the way technology gets used here is very different from what investors in Western markets are, for example, used to seeing. It's a very
I don't
different.
recall any animations. Any animation.
I'm sure all of our discussions are as smooth as they are right now. I'm sure. But I think to in a very dumbed down way, in many other models, technology is at the forefront and everything else is used to prop up that technology. Whereas in a managed marketplace model, you have the solution with upfront, and then you have the second piece, which is technology, which sort of acts as a connecting layer for various service aspects or operational aspects of the business. And frankly, in many of the businesses, it is quite sufficient for it to stay that way. There's no need to prop up the technology to be the center of the winner of the show. And the third piece, and this varies again by the model, is to also deploy working capital. Now, obviously, there is a interesting aspect here. You deploy working capital only in a sense where you get a good return on it, right? Not because obviously anyone given a choice, a customer, if you have the option to pay later, you obviously will, right? The ramification therein is how do you monetize, or how do you make additional money, or how do you achieve a right balance between winning the customer over, delivering satisfaction, but also not getting strangled with the lack of liquidity. So you have to design your model in a way where you deliver yourself a great return. And that's what most of these models then capture, these three pieces. Which piece is amplified more, or which piece you amplify to the max, depends a bit on the use case, the products involved, who are the customers, etc.
But I think within this marketplace model, so we're discussing right now, like, what are the models that India is minting in terms of construction tech? So marketplace procurement topics is what you're discussing right now. And so within that, what I learned from you over the years is that within the emerging market context, India being the forerunner in minting these models, there's reliability issues, there's quality and trust issues that you can fix by actually injecting quality control, injecting timely deliveries, and just reliability and transparency into this process, right? So that's the context of this, and we're in higher interest environments typically than in, let's say, for example, European markets historically, but even for now, where working capital has a significant cost, but on the other hand can also deliver significant ROCE, especially when applied to giving access to working capital to organizations that previously would not be getting it because it's intransparent and they are not, there's no credit rating for that, etc. So all of that is the marketplace type, the B2B marketplace type model, but applied to construction tech that the Indian context scene has been minting. You led the original seed round in Z-Work. So you should know, you're an early investor in infra market. You should know, Ramakant from LiveSpace very, very well. So you should know. So that's awesome. But what are the other models in construction tech that India is churning out?
So interestingly, the models which have gained the most adoption at scale, and I guess a salute to our VC friends, wherever our VC friends have also been gracious enough to pile in the most money, have all been mostly borrowed or derivatives of the same model, but applied to various use case contexts. For instance, there are models now. So the models we just described, it starts off, for example, with this relatively simple use case of a customer and a supplier based in the same country, largely similar set of understanding of quality, price, realization, etc., etc. Now, you can also apply this model in a different sense where, for example, your supply is entirely based in India, but you're manufacturing exclusively for exports.
Aha.
Right? So there, what we described as the logistics challenge when you're designing a domestic marketplace flips over a bit to how well you integrate with freight forwarders. And the quality and reliability aspect is not about, hey, can you be on time, etc., although that obviously also matters. It also depends on can you, and this comes back to a point we had made last week, can you also deliver materials and deliver a manufactured output that allows you a high price realization in exported markets or in export markets? That's another variant of the model. Interestingly, and I must say this, as I guess hats off to construction tech in general, I find that it's a model where within India, construction tech is the forerunner, and other manufacturing use cases, for example, in lifestyle, in apparel, in auto parts, etc., they've actually learned from this playbook in construction and implemented it. And we're seeing
Interesting.
more. We hardly see that, right, in our industry, but it's quite fascinating how
But
that's played out.
it makes sense if you think about it, because construction has certain supply chain dynamics that make it fit to be the first for this model. You have very high AOVs, average order
Hmm.
values, typically. You
Hmm.
typically have custom procurement, not serial procurement of parts.
Hmm.
Of course, we do have examples of that where you would have vertically integrated general contractors or modular offsite builders, etc., that would have a standardized part strategy and then have that serially produced. But that's a minuscule share of the
Yeah.
material GDP that goes into construction. The vast majority of material GDP in construction is actually custom made orders,
Hmm.
which is perfect for this model. Then you have higher AOVs. So that is that, and then the timing aspect of having to be just in time, and with it the perfection of having an integrated and transparent supply chain. That requirement is not as high as it is in other high volume
Yeah.
manufacturing industries. So here you have three characteristics of construction that made it perfect for the
Hmm.
cross-border manufacturing contact models, in my opinion.
Hmm. Yeah. And so I think that's so to come back to your original question of what other models. So I think first I must emphasize the degree to which just the basic starting template of the B2B managed marketplace model has been localized, adapted, repainted in a different coat for a specific model. It's to an extreme degree in India. And I think I can't recall when we had done this, Patrick. Maybe you could help me out. I feel like sometime late last year or early this year, we had done an internal study of B2B marketplace funding and mapped it out on the whole world.
Yeah,
And I
that was
think
February and
it was
March.
like more than
Yep.
half of all the funding in the world had gone to India. So in
Yep.
that specific archetype of firms, it's clearly like a forerunner, and which is why even when we speak around the world, someone wants to be a Z work for some market or some specific product. Someone wants to be an infra market for something. Someone wants to be an off business for something. So that's really taken on.
Yeah.
Now, I must admit that the other set of solutions, it's more it's yet to be proven, but I think there's quite a few exciting solutions which could represent the next generation. And I guess also alluding to our upcoming topic, I feel like going back to something we've been discussing in an overarching discussion on a skill deficit or a labor deficit, etc. There's so many different
Hmm.
models which I cannot think of a better place than India to solve that problem.
What about exporting labor as a
Exactly,
context
exactly,
startup model?
right. And I guess the other thing which has also happened in the last 5 years is India has gone from being the second most populous nation to the
Hmm.
most populous, right?
Now
Right. So
officially.
exactly, right, exactly. So mathematically, if there's any country which can solve for labor deficit or workforce deficit, there's no other country mathematically better than India in that position.
And the Middle
I
East has been taking advantage of that
Mhm.
for a while
Yeah,
already.
yeah,
More informal in many ways, not
yeah.
always ethically or morally correct. But we've had the cross-border manufacturing model that was
Mhm.
minted. It's originated from India.
Yeah.
Why not apply that in a compliant and human way to the skilled workforce
Hmm.
opportunity coming out of India?
Hmm. Absolutely. I mean, and I definitely think that has tremendous mileage. What I also So the reason why I'm very excited about the various imagination and reimagination of how availability of workforce, labor, skilling, generation of employment is exciting. I think it's such a strong need in the market, much like many of the managed marketplace models are, which is why I think once we get a decent constellation of founders, the timing works out right, you'll probably again have a lot of things coming together, just like they did for the managed marketplaces. Things scaling up profitably, achieving a ton of scale, and being deserving unicorns, right? Which is how the
I agree.
ecosystem as a whole
I agree.
benefits.
So that was models. That's fascinating to hear, and I think it's good to put it. I mean, India is on everybody's radar, but just getting a feeling for how significant it is for construction tech, it's just awesome to hear it and listen to you. Let's talk about how it gets done, though, like how the
Mhm.
sausage is made. And so we're having so many smirks over the years when we talk about founder in geography A, and then in geography B, and then in geography C, and the differences, just
Yeah.
how they act, behave, talk to you.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, how they pitch.
Hmm.
So describe for maybe someone less familiar with India, what makes you smile about the differences between how founder conversations are for you in India compared to what you hear from elsewhere.
I mean, look, even within the markets I cover, right? So within Asia Pacific and Africa. So you'll be surprised how often it happens that someone with tremendous pedigree and experience, right, in India, um, will have a surprisingly humble way of presenting. And obviously, look, I'm generalizing here. There's exceptions to this rule in general. But if I were to statistically take a median persona, you'll be surprised how humble that person will be in pitching, how humble that person will be in negotiation, right? That's another thing we have discussed in an earlier episode, how important that is. Deal closure ultimately matters as well. In many other markets, right? And I think we share anecdotes all the time from other parts of the world, but I face that myself in the various markets I cover. There's a much more frictionful, binary, um, not so warm way of negotiating elsewhere, where I think it often comes from a very binary judgment of a specific number and what that number represents. I find it interesting how, in the most accomplished of Indian founders, there's this, mind you, that's not all good. It probably also points to systematic deficiency in the ecosystem, which I can get to. But there's a humility of, oh, you know what, maybe it's due to some failing within me, that which is why this negotiation has come to this level. So maybe let's try to build
I
a
want to
bond.
say,
Let's try
so
to mend this relationship deficit.
this is fascinating to hear from me. So I spent some time in China when I was studying. This is almost 20 years ago. And so back then, a Chinese professor who had done his PhD in the US, then came back to China, this was Tsinghua University. He was saying, Patrick, when you drive a car in the US or in Europe compared to China, and you get in a traffic accident or
Hmm.
someone, cuts your lane, in the US and in Europe, you getting cut lane would say, what an idiot. This guy doesn't know how to drive. So you
Yeah.
look for the problem in the person. Whereas in a Chinese context, and by extension, I think it's more of an Asian mindset, but with of course, very, very big nuances. In the Asian context, the person would say, hey, what's wrong with this person? Like what's wrong in their life or in their
Yeah.
situation that makes them drive like this? And so
Yeah.
what you're describing, the opposite way, when you're screwing up, founders in India that more often than not would say, hey, what's wrong about me? I can
Yeah.
tell you, like I wish to have that conversation more often in the
Yeah.
Western markets
Yeah.
with founders. Like, no, I mean, this investor was an idiot, or that customer, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's this humility that you're speaking to, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually find it really endearing, I have to say. It leads to very real sort of a very real investor founder dynamic, very friend like. It's also a firmer base on which to have tougher conversations, but it generally feels like, so not to say that everyone in the other markets people are rude per se, but it's a respect that seems to transcend a professional relationship, if that makes sense.
Do you
And
see
I
a
find it
difference when an Indian founder has studied abroad? Is there a difference then?
could be. Um, I mean, I presume by studied abroad, you're referencing someone who still has Indian upbringing, went abroad, and then came back.
Probably, yeah.
I think in those cases things don't change a whole lot.
Okay,
If you're referring to someone with Indian roots but has otherwise spent most of their time abroad, that would generally be a different experience.
got it. Okay.
Generally speaking. With that said, I must point out, I think while that is a very good experience, I think it may also come down to, and this is again a controversial topic because many others, and if you speak with some investors in India, they'll tell you, hey, there's way too much capital sloshing around. I'm personally of the opinion that especially at the growth rounds, there's a clear deficit. There's a clear deficit, right? The ecosystem desperately needs more capital, more steady state capital, let me put it that way, more steady state capital, given the rate of change and the rate of growth that's happening. So what we have now is we have these random ups and downs based on you have a steady pool of capital investing regularly, but a large chunk is made up by global investors where it ebbs and flows depending on the macro sentiment.
Well,
And
I
I
think
think that
we have a few IPOs lined up in generally Indian tech over the next few years,
that's right.
um, and actually within construction tech.
Mhm.
I think that will unlock a lot of growth stage
Yeah,
capital. That certainty of IPO liquidity will do that.
yeah. I think what I feel is uh, one way or the other, there's some sort of hardship or some sort of crunch which happens relatively early in the journey, either in the process of fundraising or in the process of, mind you, even with growth, India, I'm not to sugarcoat anything, it's a tough market, right? Many things we take for granted in the Western world, you actually need to make it happen for yourself in a market like India, right? So in that sense, I guess you kind of get humble because it beats all the arrogance is taken out of you by the sheer process of trying to build a company. But I think it also highlights that there is a deficit in the ecosystem, that it's a tough place, and that there is a bit of a deficit in steady state capital. I'm hopeful that it's a question of time and more success coming through, and that is what will draw in all these things.
So what does someone that has no India experience neither as an investor nor as a private individual, let's say someone with no India experience wants to now invest VC in India, like what
Hmm.
chances do you give them?
At what stage?
You tell me.
Okay. I would say if you're a deep pocketed investor, one good entry point, if you have no exposure whatsoever, is to maybe come in at Series B, give or take. Because usually what I find is at Series B, you have a pretty good handle of what's been vetted out, any competition. Not to say the competition always goes away, but in quite a few use cases, you have a pretty good handle of who is ahead and who will stay ahead at Series B in India. Which I don't think that statement holds true in a market like the US, for example. But generally, it's fairly accurate to make that statement in India. If your ambitions are to do earlier stage, like pre-seed, seed, or even Series A, I would say it's a tough ask. If you have never done it, don't really have ties to the ecosystem, um, be prepared to make a ton of mistakes, which has usually happened, by the way, which has usually happened with, and I guess also a reality check. While a lot of global funds have kept deepening their AUM in India, their fund size, etc. A few have come and gone, right? Because they found in the first fund vintage, and this is circa 2014, 2015-ish. I
Uh-huh.
think a few went away. Andreessen Horowitz, for example, has still never entered India. I think has publicly stated that it will not come to India. So it is tough.
NEA had an India strategy,
NEA had an
left.
India fund, it moved on
Sequoia
as well.
just announced they're parting with their India team.
Exactly, right? So all these also obviously point to it not being the easiest place to do business in. So I guess if you don't know what your own unfair advantage is of why you're entering there, and by the way, just to be not to be cheeky here, but the unfair advantage can't be that hey, I have Indian roots. In my opinion, that's not sufficient to
You mean
qualify.
like 1.4 billion other people?
Exactly, exactly.
So unfair.
Yeah, so I think if you haven't been steeped in the ecosystem and have built up either ties to the ecosystem, trying your hand, or have some sort of unfair advantage, it's a tough ask. There may be other ways to learn the market before doing it yourself.
Got it. I actually think, I mean, in these situations, some people who really want to break into a market, especially if they have then the the dry powder to throw some money around, they think they can buy themselves into the
Hmm.
market. Like that's the worst recipe of not knowing a market and then spending a lot of money, isn't it?
Hmm. Yeah,
That's
yeah,
how you get into expensive mistakes.
yeah. Hey, but talking about learning from mistakes, although we could also learn from successes, I would argue, right? Um, I would love to have this discussion on, I guess, what you wanted to talk about of how we might be seeing an evolution, what that could represent for us as we go from a first generation of construction tech to a new generation of it.
Yeah, so we're very elegantly now moving to the second part of the conversation. First-gen Contact versus second-gen Contact. So first of all, what triggered this for me, right? So this week I was doing this completely random for a different task. I was doing this list of for someone, hey, you might already know these contacts, and the list there was PlanGrid from our good friends there, and there was Procore. There was Alice Technologies, there was Avir on that list, there was Buildots, there was Open Space. A lot of companies that within construction tech had raised a good amount of money prior to, I don't know, 2021, I guess, something like that. And so what I realized is, it's actually when you do a list like that for someone that comes from the industry, but maybe not from venture, it looks like a list of, okay, here's some US software companies.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. And so that's first trigger. Second trigger is you and I had a discussion a couple of years ago about these waves typically rolling through sectors where the first wave of ventures get less funding, but they prepare, and a lot of them will eventually fail, but they prepare the ground for the next wave or the next generation of founders in the sector,
Yeah.
but also for the investors investing in the sector, because they get to learn from the first wave, those few that were successful and those few, or maybe the majority that was unsuccessful. And so a few years ago, you and I discussed exactly that. And we found out, for example, hey, 3D concrete printing was such a first wave technology
Yeah.
for construction. Like when you looked in 2013 in the media and you typed for construction tech, chances are what you got sold as construction tech was 3D concrete printing.
Yeah.
That was like, I'm not even sure that was the first generation. That was probably the zeroth generation in a way. So that reminded me of that conversation we've had. So that was the second trigger. Now, when I apply that to the question that we want to discuss today, is it looks to, so first of all, construction tech in the eyes of the media is very much still a US thing, right? And so I think that's going away. The next generation of construction tech is not an exclusive US thing. US will be and is a core market for construction tech, but it cannot
Yeah.
claim to be synonymous with construction tech. Hence, we discussed India. Africa actually will be quite exciting market
Yeah.
for that as well. And I think Europe especially looks to be churning out a few really cool construction robotics companies
Yeah.
at the moment. And in my opinion, is leading in terms of the energetic renovation aspect of construction tech, right? So
Yeah.
we're diversifying with the next generation of construction tech. We're not being synonymous with US only anymore, but we get to benefit from really a global community of construction. Hey, I haven't even mentioned Australia. In my opinion, Australia, for the first wave of companies in relation to its population, generated the
Yeah.
highest share of really exciting construction,
I
safety
mean, there's
culture, Aconex.
two unicorns from Australia. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so that's one angle. I also want to talk about the technologies, but like, is that making sense to you? What's your reaction?
I think it makes total sense. I think what I also recall from our conversation, or maybe it was an even older conversation. What I seem to recall, I think the terminologies have now changed, but I remember discussing that, hey, if we think we are at the dawn of construction tech, and it's very bare bones, and everything is still the infrastructure for a new digital revolution are being built, maybe we first need the Amazons, the Yahoos, and so on, right? Or maybe early versions of a Google. And only then we can think of other things. And I think everything else is maybe like putting the cart before the horse and expecting things to work.
Oh, you mean BIM?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, okay. That brought back a nice memory, right? So yes, for BIM, and several other solutions, right? I think, and Patrick, you'll know this. When we started Fundamental, a lot of the conversations we used to have with, I guess, if we call them external ecosystem players, more on the Western side, it would seem more like R&D projects, right? Where it was like cast to the side as, okay, this is what construction tech is. And I think maybe it was missing the point that you need to respect the wave, respect an adoption curve of where the market is and where it needs to get to. I think, as you rightly pointed out, if not in terms of large scale adoption, the enabling layers for a lot of basic switches in digital method of doing things on the procurement side, on the design side, etc. Those rails have now been laid, and I think we now have the next generation of companies building on top of these evolved behaviors and the rails that have been laid to build even more digitized forms. Just like how Web 2 came after Web 1, I'll be silent on Web 3, but and limited to Web 2 for now. So we might well see like a very exciting second generation building on top of an very promising first generation of companies.
And that's because the first generation of construction techies have helped companies adopt software in gaps where they didn't have software before. It's not like construction didn't use software. Construction used, have you ever looked at Primavera? I mean, I'm not sure everybody would agree that it's software, but believe me, it is. So it's not like construction hasn't used software, but there were gaps and holes to plug that now create an infrastructure that is giving you a more complete set of data points throughout the different workflows that you have. So that's what the first wave certainly created. But beyond this infrastructure, it's the behaviors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and I would say it has changed a lot in the last 18 to 24 months, actually. When you
Yeah,
talk to the users, the strategics out there, it seems to be 5 years ago when I talked to folks in the industry, it was like, yeah, I mean, we have the software, it's fine, but in the end, we need to deliver projects, we need to win projects, etc. What this recession has done is a refocusing also on where can I find efficiencies. What the
mm-hmm.
workforce and skilled labor shortage has done is where can I find automation potential? And that's what you see in AI is like, strategics are discussing AI like it is the holy grail. It's quite hilarious in some ways where, they underestimated it for 30 years and now they overestimate everything within 4 weeks in what
Yeah,
it can do. That's fine though, because what it shows is that there is a general adoption curve, to your point, that we now are climbing up, and we're on a pretty steep incline, in my opinion, now,
absolutely.
after a
Yeah,
very shallow incline for a long while, because this behavior is now there. I want
yeah.
to adopt. It can help me with workforce. It can help me with efficiency. It can help me with my cost, yada, yada, yada.
My hypothesis is it also stems, interestingly enough, from a confidence derived from seeing things actually getting proven in real life. So, what I mean by that is, in the beginning, if you're not sure if something actually gets delivered, gets integrated in our day to day as part of construction tech, I think more to indulge yourself or an intellectual fantasy, you may engage in all these projects, right? Which probably have nothing to do with real world adoption today, right? Like I mean, BIM 5 years ago or some other technology, many other technologies. Now I think a lot of folks who are seriously involved in construction tech, whether it's corporates, whether it's scaled up firms, whether it's people who have tasted some success, they realize, hey, they can't just sit on the sidelines because in some cases, as we are also aware from within our portfolio, there are literally firms started in the last few years which are legitimately taking discernible market share from incumbent, right? So they can't, and this is what can be described, these companies can be described as construction tech firms, uh, right? So, and in some cases, even firms are, you know, are deemed as disruptive threats to the extent where unless they get acquired within the next few years, they could legitimately represent a threat to
Who might
incumbents.
have an interest in acquiring software companies in the AEC sector before they become big?
I
I
have no
guess I'll have
idea.
to
I have no
research
idea.
that.
I
Yeah.
have no idea. So who could that be? So I think now that you either have firms taking market share or who represent a disruptive threat, at that point you can't say, hey, you know what, I will ignore all of this and just look at these indulgent projects. And I think once you get a sense that things are actually happening, you derive confidence from it and then you participate in it.
And so I wanna double click and actually double underline what you're saying.
Mhm.
So that's a key difference between the second generation and the first generation. So the first generation had to make do with, let's talk numbers, when we with a certain amount of VC funding that is significantly larger now. So when we started Fundamental, at that point we realized there's this pattern when sectors take off, right?
Mhm.
When we started Fundamental, there was a cumulative 4.5 billion of VC funding that had gone into the sector of construction tech. 4.5 billion. This is by mid 2018, historically till then.
Mhm.
And the pattern is when you look at the other B2B sectors, even B2C sectors, prop tech, logistics tech, we looked at mobility tech, we looked at
Yeah.
energy, we looked at travel tech, all the sector, fintech, we looked at all the sectors that really took off, after 2008. The pattern
Mhm.
has been that it takes you from 5 billion to 10 billion of cumulated VC funding, 2 to 3 years. It's a universal pattern. And then, and this is now the exponentiality in this function, from 10 billion to 50, it takes you another 2 to 3 years. So 5 to 10,
Mhm.
2 to 3 years, 10 to 50, 2 to 3 years. Construction when we started was at 4.5. That was one of the macro bets that we were making. Today, so this was 2018, 5 years later, we're at 24 billion.
Wow.
2.4,
Nice.
right?
Yeah.
So the point in relation to the first gen models and the next gen models is so the incumbents didn't have to fear a lot of software companies or marketplace companies when there was a total of 4.5 billion over 20 years that went into it. It was quite comfortable. Hey, if there was a project I liked, or maybe there was a project that could become disruptive, I can buy for 250 million.
Yeah.
But probably there's no growth capital available for this. The game has changed. There's so much VC
It's
funding,
very
and
true.
construction tech is one of the hottest sectors. I also want to talk about the founders, but sticking to the numbers now, it's one of the hottest sectors. So that when you're an incumbent, you can't believe anymore that there's this one project and then you're going to buy it out because there's no funding. No, you have to deal with a host of experienced founders that have
Mhm.
been successful before, that come with experiences, and there's enough funding available to carry them to IPO.
Yeah.
That's the difference in the next generation.
100% agreed. Yeah.
And then in terms of founders, this is what waves rolling through venture sectors also does. Is it generates, you taught me this, it generates founders that have tasted success.
Mhm.
And then if you're lucky, they go into construction tech. Two examples from our portfolio that are extremely high profile. One is Alec and the gang, who
Mhm.
built DigitalOcean into a
Mhm.
5 billion market cap, New York Stock Exchange
Yeah.
IPO'd company, today at 700 million of revenue. And Alec and the whole co-founder team chose construction tech to build welcome homes.
Yeah.
We did the seed round. Lucas and Jota built Privalia.com,
Mhm.
raised from Insight, Index, General Atlantic, generated, I think, 800 million annual revenue, if my memory
Wow.
serves,
Nice.
built it to that, and then sold it to Vente Privé for,
Mhm.
according to media, I've never asked Lucas, so this is me reading the media, 560 million US dollar.
Yeah, that's the number I
Lucas,
recall as well. Yeah.
yeah, and so Lucas and Jota and Josep, who was also with them at Privalia, they co-founded 011H, a construction tech in Europe, where we
Yeah.
led the seed round. These founders that are next generation founders, not first generation founders, they know how to build generational companies, and they are in
Mhm.
construction tech now.
Yeah.
That's different.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think we'll see more and more of this. I think in my opinion, it's a given.
Zwork founder Srinath, isn't he of the
You're right.
same pedigree?
Correct. So he was one of the founders of Off Business, also in construction, and started up again in construction in Zwork.
There you go. And that
Yeah.
changes, right? So when
Yeah.
someone if you work in a strategic, or you just stumble upon construction tech and your exposure to maybe the behind the scenes of venture isn't on a day-to-day basis, and you look at, yeah, construction tech, I know it, it's Procore, etc. No. That was 2010 to 2020, what you have in
Yeah.
mind. The
Yeah.
next generation is better funded, better founders, more disruptive technologies.
Yeah. And in many cases, I think shaping up to be real businesses. I'm also very hopeful. I mean, again, not to, I guess, rehash old stuff. You had very spicy commentary on Procore. I remember a few weeks ago. But I'm also hopeful.
Sorry, I only posted numbers.
Indeed, right? And I guess those numbers reveal everything that needs to be revealed. Uh,
200,000 ARR per FTE.
I'm. How do you think we're already at the start of a new generation?
I think we're already in the middle of
Hmm.
it. So I think in terms of the models that also came up quite anew. So energetic renovation, we did have renovation techs within
Yeah,
construction tech, but they were typically bathrooms and kitchens and the
yeah.
like, but nothing in terms of physical substance of the
Hmm.
building. That's different since the start of the Ukraine war. So, for example, Enter in Germany is like the market leader to do the auditing of physical substance of buildings, B2B, B2C, unreal revenue traction, great
Yeah.
margins, already been
And
net profitable.
you of course led the pre-seed there as well as the Series A.
Yeah, and now Coatu came in, Target Global, Partech, AO PropTech, great roster of investors, and
Hmm.
amazing angels as well. But so this is a new breed of companies that goes into the energetic renovation of
Yeah.
businesses, right? Robotics. There's so much happening in that space, and I love on-site robotics. I get all the off-site and modular thesis, but it's been around for decades, and there are reasons why that can only apply to a slice of the market, in my
Hmm.
opinion. And construction will stay an on-site business for the most projects. And so on-site robotics, what I see happening there is giving me a lot of excitement to fix workforce issues.
I'm super excited, man. I mean, it's quite remarkable. I think if we had asked ourselves 5 years ago if in 2023 this is what the construction tech landscape would have looked
I
like,
could
I
have,
mean, I guess we would have hoped for it, but we wouldn't
yeah,
have guessed it.
yeah,
I'm super excited for what's to come.
yeah. I mean, the best way to lose money in VC is to make predictions.
Yes,
Right?
indeed.
Yeah, too many assumptions.
Yeah.
This is great. So our little ritual here, what's in your calendar for next week that you look forward to?
So, relatively speaking, next week, a lot more of my time is just catching up with a ton of founders, as in from our portfolio. I mean, just doing a whole lot of reviews, in some cases, even conceptualizing some strategies, etc. So, looking forward to it.
It's fun.
A bit of change of pace, looking inward rather than outward. What's on the docket for you next week?
Looking right now, a lot of regular catch-ups. Good to meet a few people again, which I haven't
Hmm.
seen after a while. But I couldn't say. Hang on, what is this one here? I guess I need to get a little bit more excited about my calendar next week.
Okay,
So
okay,
nothing yet that
okay.
blows it out of the water. Cool, but this has been fun. Good talking about India, and looking forward to also getting more thoughts and a stream of thinking about India to maybe educate people about your view
Oh,
about the Indian
I'm
context.
working on it. I'm working on it. It should take me. I mean, no
Don't
promises.
make
So
promises.
let's see. Let's see how long it takes. But I'm penning down some of my thoughts. Uh, and what I said today, it's more of a teaser, I suppose. And the idea is to present a stream of thoughts as to what I have: thoughts, observations, excitement, pride, caution. I guess all of those things in a stream of posts. Working on it. Hopefully, we'll be out with it fairly soon.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Can't wait to read it. And you
Thank
guarantee
you.
it's not written by GPT, right?
Oh, but you gave me a great idea, sir. You gave me a fabulous idea. I hadn't thought of it.
Ah,
I hadn't thought of it.
great. That will be some original thinking.
Oh, now you've planted the seed in my mind. I have to use
Hey,
GPT now.
I do these slide decks for AECVC that I do like 3-4
Yeah.
times a month, and I've recently tried once like an AI slide generator.
Uh
Oh
huh.
man, it was terrible. It didn't work. I was hoping so much that it would work, but it didn't work. Text is much better, of course. I mean, GPT is
Okay.
amazing, but for these slide decks, that one didn't work.
I mean,
for
I'm
me.
still doing it the old-fashioned way, but maybe I'll use some help with the old
Aha.
GPT on this one. I'll
I
see what
think
throws up.
I think the help will be Fabio. He's already switching off the stream now.
See.
Fabio Sunday. Nice. Cool. Now this has been fun.
This was tremendous.
Great. Well then, sir, I wish you a wonderful weekend.
I wish you a lovely weekend as well, sir.
See you soon. Ciao.
Yeah.